Welcome back to this playlist on the lockdown Landy rebuild. This is the rebuild of a 1974 109-inch Series 3 Land Rover. This is part 7 of the series, where I'm going to be repainting the roof. As you can see, I've already done a lot of work. Most of the work on the bulkhead has been rust repairs and wiring refurbishment. That's all finished now. I've done the chassis completely. Mechanically, this vehicle's in amazing shape. It's a one-owner farm vehicle. It's never been registered for use on public roads. It's trundled around a farm for its entire life, so the Ks are very low. And thankfully, it's been reasonably well looked after, except for the last owners, who were a couple of teenagers, thought they'd give it a tidy up. So I've had to undo all that. I think the two things that you're faced with when you start working on Land Rover paint work is the fact that it's an agricultural vehicle, so nobody really cares that much, and it's likely been painted by people who don't really know what they're doing. So you can see dirt under the flaked paint here, because 5 subsequent coats of paint and it's hardly been rubbed down. I'm going to have to take these areas right back to aluminium and feather them out and start all over again. It's a lot of work, but it's worth it, because as I said earlier, this vehicle has never been registered for the road. It's lived on a farm all its life and it's done really low Ks. It's just been bashed and beaten a little bit and likely never been washed in its entire life, even before any of the 5 paint jobs that it's had. And up on the roof, I can't see anybody paying particular attention. The only thing that ever sees it close up is tree branches. But what I'm doing here is starting off with 150 grit, which is really coarse, and I'm feathering back down to 0, back down to the base aluminium. So here is phase 1 of the feathering out. You can see that I've got flaking paint still around the edges, and I'm nearly down at the basic aluminium. And here's stage 2. I've swapped out the 150 grit paper for 240 grit, and I'm now feathering out the layers of paint, getting it ready for the primer. On the roof there are dozens of spot weld holes. Nobody rubs down properly inside the spot weld holes, so I've got a trick for you. If you select a self-tapping screw of the right size, you can spin it inside the holes and remove everybody else's unrubbed down mess of paint flakes, moss and lichen. It really does add to the professionalism of the job. It means that in subsequent months down the line, random little pieces of paint aren't going to flake out of these holes and show what's underneath. It's just going the extra mile on what's going to be a lovely rebuild job. I swear that there were still things growing in the gutters on this thing when they painted it last time. Look at that, look. This paint's not sticking at all. There you go, there's living things underneath the paint. They've painted over the lichen. There are 2 or 3 layers of incompatible sealer that have been used over this, and they're not sticking together. Water's creeping between them. Once you've used one type of sealer, you've got to stick with it. You can't put silicon over a mastic or an epoxy over a silicon. So what I've done is hit this with the wire wheel and rubbed it right down to nothing. I'm going to attend to the loose missing rivets, and then I'm going to reapply a urethane sealant, which is what they use nowadays in the bus and transport industry. It's got a 25% joint movement capability. Now that the residue of glue is taken out, it's time to hit it with the DA sander, the double action sander. You can see the scarring that I've left from the wire wheel. The DA sander will smooth all that out and give me a nice gradient to spray a good coat of primer over, which will give me a decent build, and you won't see any of the feathering out once the top coat's applied. And once all your edges have been feathered out, it's then time to give it a really thorough blow down and get all the dust off, because we're going to do the first spot prime. All of the parts that have been worked on get primed, then I'll go over with knifing compound and fill in any small imperfections that I can still see. After that, after a good period of drying down, which depends on the weather, it's ready to be sanded back. I'm just starting to hand sand these rear areas. Anywhere that's small and tight to get into, I'm going to sand by hand. Around the rivet heads, these little quarter panels up here on the back of the roof, you can't get in with the double action sander, so these just have to be done by hand. I'm not going to sand through the primer. I'm satisfied with the surface I've got. All I've got to do is key it up and make sure that that lovely top coat of 2K limestone cream goes on without any runs or flaking in the future. It's June here and the weather's really starting to chill off as autumn takes a hold. It's taken me several days to get this far because of the paint I'm using. I'm putting a fair amount on because it's a filler primer, and that depth has to harden. So patches that I sprayed here 2 days ago are now hard enough for me to sand off. I'll sand off these small parts on the roof. I'm fairly happy now looking at the whole thing. It's just about ready to paint. All I need to do is check the temperature. If I can ensure that I'm going to get 4 hours over 15 degrees, I'm away. And here we are. We've got 15.7 degrees. So, it's a rush. Tuck all your loose clothing in. Grab your gear. Uncover. Dust it off. And get this thing painted. I've got 4 hours. First, I do all of the gutters. You do the hardest parts first, and that ensures that you get a good coverage of paint, because you're going to be going into those pieces just once extra. You can lay down a good thick coat without any risk of it running. The easy parts you fill in later. So I'm going around and around. I've got a fast hardener in the paint. This will tack off, even in this temperature, in about 20 minutes. It will be dry enough to touch in 2 hours, I hope, and fully handleable within 12. On a warm day, it's much faster, so you use a slow hardener. But you see that I'm doing all of the awkward bits first, and I'll leave this to tack off for 10-15 minutes, and then I'll come back and give it one final wet coat, and that will be it for the day. Can't do any more once that's painted. This cup holds 600 mils or 1 pint, so I'm going to be putting 1200 mils or 2 pints of paint over this entire panel. No point in showing you the second cup because you won't even see where I've been over the first coat. So we'll wrap it up here. Thanks for watching. Don't miss next week's video because, weather permitting, I'll be painting the tub and getting the whole thing bolted back together again.